you should always picture an audience when you're doing your work, and so that it's consistent, because you work off of the same kind of ignorance. You work off the same kind of, what they do know and what they're aware of and what they care about. And eventually, I think you end up convincing other people, and that's where more success comes from.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Tourette. My guest today is Kristof Morrow. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about him. 1, he is an award-winning journalist. 2, also a disabled veteran. And 3, his whole mission as a writer is to help people better understand one another. And when you get to understand more about Kristof, you'll appreciate the importance of his goal. Kristof Morrow, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Shakespeare, thank you so much for having me, George. You're very kind.
Delighted to be talking with you today. I'm going to make it easy for people right off the bat, because they might wonder why, for example, you just said Shakespeare when we weren't even talking about Shakespeare. And Kristof also has Tourette's syndrome, which means, and as most people might understand it, that people have tics. They often say things involuntarily. Sometimes they might even have physical tics. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And let's see how that gives Kristof a particular perspective that most of us can't see. And today we're going to talk about the spirit of marketing. And that's an interesting phrase that you used, Kristof. Tell us what that means to you.
I think that means ultimately like how much of yourself, how human your approach to marketing is. How much you deviate from the notion that there has to be sort of a calculated approach. It's a lot more human, I think. Yeah. So for example, like I have Tourette's. The first time I went viral on TikTok, I spent the first 3 weeks without discussing. I had already written a book and published it. I didn't talk about my book at all for 3 weeks. And then I decided after 3 weeks, I had humanized myself enough. I only had like 50 followers. But the 50 followers that I did have were really committed to understanding me as a person. When I did talk about my work, I went viral and sold like 800 copies overnight. Yeah.
And so clearly those 50 people didn't buy all 800 copies. So the word got around.
That's right. That's right.
And they helped, and I'm guessing that those 50 that you started with helped spread the word because they liked you as a person.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think it's a large part of my success. And that's what I mean by the spirit of marketing. I mean, like truly having a soul to it. Again, it's not calculated. Yeah, and you can tell by the effort that I put into my videos, which was almost none at all. Yeah, and to not a lot of production value is not, you know what I'm saying? Shakespeare.
And Kristof, so in presenting your message in a human way, does that mean exposing your flaws?
Absolutely. I think restraining the notion that you're perfect is more so the quality that I'm stressing, because ultimately, like having Tourette's means generally that you have a lot of anxiety, that you're obsessive, depression, and some of these qualities end up leading to flaws, like personality flaws and mistakes that you make in your life. And Shakespeare. Yeah. And so, yeah, really, truly embracing the notion that you're imperfect is a part of it too. And that because I think that resonates with people in the audience.
Kristof, if we present ourselves as imperfect, how do we cross the barrier when it's time when we're asking someone to buy something from us?
Well, I think it's like the difference between you ever seen Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit? The difference between the two, there's a lot of people discuss how much better Lord of the Rings is versus the Hobbit series, which is directed by the same director, but one has a lot of CGI and the other one has a great deal of practical effects. The Lord of the Rings, of course, is the one with all the practical effects. It had so many and it was filmed in New Zealand, and a lot of people they didn't have enough people that could ride horses, so they actually had to, even though the army was supposed to be made up of men, they had to hire a bunch of women to ride the horses into battle, and they didn't just CGI them into the. They could have, but they didn't just CGI a bunch of horses. You know what I'm saying? So, in that sense, a lot of people really embrace a human effort in it, and I think that again that resonates with people. Yeah, Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare.
And curious that you mentioned Lord of the Rings. I read that story decades ago, and I was delighted to see the movie. And what I noticed in that, beyond the fact that they used more human, real people in the movie instead of CGI, I also found that the characters were appealed to me as human qualities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're very archetypal. They're often archetypes. So I think that the human element comes from the fact that they have a weakness. You know, they always stress that Aragorn is going to die at a certain age, and that's the whole conflict with his with Arwen. She's an elf. She's going to live forever. And the fact that Frodo is flawed, and the fact that Bilbo was flawed, and the fact that and it goes on and on and on. That and ultimately, it's about overcoming that. Especially because I have Tourette's, I know exactly how that feels. And I think that people they pick up on the conflicts, the internal conflicts that you deal with. So, like when it comes to marketing and actually selling yourself, that's an important component too. Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare.
Now I'm curious when it comes to talking about internal conflicts. When we're presenting our message, which is more effective, which is more helpful? Is it when talking about our own internal conflicts or talking about internal conflicts that our target audience might have?
I think it's both. I think it's the internal conflicts that you deal with, and then how you and your place in those in society. Like Shakespeare. For example, I made a video that got like 300,000 views recently, just like about a month ago, because and another one that got another 250,000 views or something crazy. And that was because right now the dating sort of what's going on in single life for people, generally the single world, is that it's really hard to approach women these days in a way that's appropriate and welcome. And I made a video about how I did that and the way that I did it, and that really resonated with a lot of women. They really appreciated how I did it, which was to walk up to them and tell them, like, I'm leaving now. I'm going to go away. Basically, I just wanted to give you this. And then I gave her a gift of a kind, and I left. And I had my contact info on there, so she could contact me if she wanted to. Anyway, so my place in that zeitgeist, along with the conflict of like my true struggle with trying to find a partner, those two things, married and brought to a union, I think really brought a lot of success to those videos, and was another. I mean, I've actually sold books because of that video. You know what I'm saying? So it's adjacent to my life as a writer, and it's an important and it's obviously made itself relevant. So marketing, I think, isn't always about a direct approach. And I think that we always remember those videos, those commercials that are really strange and that don't seem to like a lot of. I think a lot of Japanese marketing commercials are like that. It's really funny. They're always really funny and really strange, and they're memorable. But they're memorable, and that's an important part. I don't know.
And that's a curious, another curious phrase. Marketing doesn't need to be direct; that it can be indirect. And while you were saying that, what came to my mind was the ad for Apple that played in 1984 at the Super Bowl. The one that and that was the only time it played, but it was they played on the story, you know, the novel 1984, of course, and they presented that dystopian society image all in black and white, and then where someone ran up and I believe they threw a hammer at the front, kind of like a Thor's type hammer, and that broke the image. Mm-hmm. And the message, of course, was that Apple is different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It reminds me, Shakespeare. It reminds me of those commercials also of the progressive, the guy who's like getting beat up all the time, you know, every commercial, and he's like, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I've been driving all day, and I've been super busy. And then it's like, where I'm a 16-year-old kid, and I don't know, and then he gets into an accident. Anyway, it's really funny. It's just that those commercials are always very memorable because they brought a character that really, I don't know, they embodied the whole. Those are really lovely, funny commercials. Yeah, Shakespeare. But Super Bowl commercials are generally the ones that embrace, and I don't understand why they don't do that more often. I don't get it. It seems to be so effective every time. It's like they're taking a chance.
Yeah, and we tend to remember the best ones. We remember quite well, like I just remembered.
Yeah. And that would have been a good idea to buy Apple stock back then too. So.
Yes, yeah. Kicking myself for not doing that. Me and a lot of other people. How do you best reach your target audience, and how do you decide what is the message that's going to connect with them? And more importantly, how do you stay on track and not deviate and try to catch everyone? I guess I know that's a multi-part question.
No. So I think it's important to study the ones who are interested in you right away without much. So like for Shakespeare, for me, I noticed that a lot of my the people that were watching me were very compassionate people. They had jobs like they worked in nursing, or they worked in some field where they were serving people to help them. Shakespeare. And I basically just thought about the kind of person that I was always writing to in my work. And I spoke to them, and in the same way that I would when I was writing, I always had like a sort of personality in mind. You should always picture an audience when you're doing your work. Like you should always have something in your mind, and so that it's consistent, because you work off of the same kind of ignorance. You work off the same kind of what they do know, and Shakespeare, what they're aware of and what they care about. And eventually I think you end up convincing other people, and that's where more success comes from, is actually enabling yourself to convince other people rather than trying to get them like through a direct approach, you know, like trying to change your message a little bit so that it qualifies with someone else. It's those people end up convincing other people, because kindness is always convincing, you know.
And how do you show kindness in your marketing?
I think it has to do with recognizing the value that your product has, like that its true value to humanity is. Does it really contribute to the greater struggle, you know, and to really bring your intent to the forefront on that in that sense. Like you want people to know that it has those virtues and to highlight them, because if you end up trying to like deceive them with thinking that it has more value than it really does in certain ways, you're not going to convince anyone. That's a good question, actually, George. Shakespeare, when I came on Your Intended Message, I had a lot more confidence in the way the marketing, but it really does make you question everything, you know, whenever you're trying to figure out. Do you ever find that with your guests, that they have a lot more confidence in the pre-interview than they do in the actual interview?
The short answer is yes. Yes, and partly because when in the pre-interview we just chatted and we weren't being recorded, and I wasn't asking you tough questions like I might be now. And of course, you're taking a chance because, as any guest, when you're on a podcast, you don't know how good or how tough the interviewer will be. So it's naturally for your confidence to go up and down through any interaction. As a speaker, when I coach my clients on their presentations, I point out from the beginning that their confidence will vary throughout, and that's only them speaking. Mm-hmm. Their confidence will vary throughout the presentation because it could be as simple as you work up your confidence to start, and then you start your presentation and you think you're going good. You say something and you say the funny line and people laugh and makes you feel better. And then you say something else and you see someone in the front row, they're crossing their arms and frowning at you, and you think, oh, he hates me, and your confidence goes down. And that's normal for our confidence to flutter. And what is unusual in what you just did is that for someone to reveal that, you know what, my confidence just went down a little bit when you asked that question because that's something I hadn't thought about before. So you were more transparent that way. And I'm wondering, have you been told that before, that you appear to be more transparent with your feelings?
Yeah, that's a large part of, I think that's some part, at least a component of my success, is that I don't pretend to have confidence. I make no effort to falsify that. It doesn't help. It doesn't help because people can see it and then they just sort of pity you in secret. But if you confront it, I feel like they can get on board with that and they can think within themselves, like, what would I be doing in this situation? Rather than, oh gosh, look what he's doing in this situation. It allows, again, it allows you to be, for people to acknowledge your humanity. Shakespeare, especially if you're a single person like me. It's like, I have a product that is predicated, that exists only because of me and my brain. You have to capitalize on that.
And let's quickly mention that product.
Oh, Shakespeare. I wrote I wrote a pair of books so far called The Second Son, volumes 1, 2, and 3, and they're epic fantasy series. It's on Amazon. Yeah, Shakespeare.
And people can find out more about those books at his website. That's kristofmorrow.com. And you can find that link in the description below to find out about those fantasy books. Mm-hmm. And I'm also guessing, you mentioned Lord of the Rings. So did you get inspiration from that story?
I think that it was the spirit of Lord of the Rings that I really embraced. And that was the notion that anyone could achieve anything. The spirit of Lord of the Rings, which is that anyone, no matter how big or small, can achieve great and extraordinary things. I did that, except I even had even fewer sort of prejudices or discriminations. There's not any race sexism in it. So like, there's women soldiers and no one says, oh, you're a woman, you can't do that sort of thing. It's just, they just do it. And no one says boo. They just, everyone acknowledges that you can achieve great things. And so that's what I tried to do. And Lord of the Rings is an incredible, a brilliant storytelling. It's very charming. And I think people love that. Shakespeare.
Yes. I adore that story. It's fabulous. Yes. And it's quite easy to see myself in the place of Frodo, making that great sacrifice. Have you ever worked with a team on a project? And if so, how did they accept you as part of the team?
Oh, well, it really depends on what value you bring to the team. I think that ends up like determining your worth inside of it. Obviously, I think that Shakespeare. For me, I wrote a movie. Actually, what I should describe it as script doctoring, which is someone else wrote a movie, and then they said, "Can you rewrite this movie to make it, worthwhile in many respects?" And so I did. I script doctored a movie, and then got to work on set. And people recognized my worth as a talented writer. They thought I was a talented writer. And so, when it came to having scenes, like if there was a scene where dialogue was inconsistent in that sense, it didn't or they felt like it didn't work, they could approach me and talk to me about it, and I could say, "Oh, this is a scene that the director wrote, and he wanted it back in the film, so there's nothing I can do about it." Or let me talk to the director, and I can see what I can do. And so they trusted me to make the script much stronger. And so my value came entirely from skills that I had honed as a writer. And I think that they end up, it's a leadership position being a writer on a set, because a lot of people have to refer to you to say, what's the spirit of this scene? What's the next, what's the continuity emotionally with this scene and the next scene? Yeah, you have to have a larger view, a more expanded view of what's happening. And I was able to do that. That's what I do, especially when I write epic fantasy, because my epic, it's a massive undertaking. There's 180 plus characters with dialogue in my book, so Shakespeare.
And when people work with you in that context, clearly they see your strengths and respect your strengths, and they accept you as a human with flaws, as we all have.
Yeah, Shakespeare. I can't imagine, George, like on this show, like on your intended message, do you have other people that you work with? Do you have?
Yes. There are people who I coordinate with for the editing and the publishing. Yes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to collaborate. It's really hard to collaborate for me, because I have a very I don't want to say rigid, but I do have a rigid view of the way things should go, because I understand. I see I see everything in its scale, and how relevant it is to the overall mission of the story. So yeah, collaborating is difficult.
And Kristof, as we prepare to wrap up, I'm wondering if you could sit down with a team leader and give them advice about how to deal with a marketing message. Mm-hmm. And the advice that you're giving them is from a person with Tourette's. In your view of the world, what would be your advice to them that they might not get from someone else? What would be the advice that you'd say, how they look at their marketing messages?
A lot of people don't want to acknowledge their deficiencies, or they see their deficiencies. Yeah, they don't acknowledge them because they're trying to hide them, and that's an unhelpful way, I think, of marketing. For example, if you have a certain product that's produced a little bit cheaper, and so a certain component of it will generally fail after a certain number of uses or whatever. Not having that, I think it sounds paradoxical, like it doesn't make sense. It sounds counterintuitive, but like acknowledging that, saying, "Hey, we actually manufactured a little bit cheaper, and this part of it isn't going to work after a certain, and it'll have to be replaced, and this is why we have a warranty on it." Remember, these notions need to be membered to the marketing. I don't know, because as a human, we all have flaws that we bring to every team or table, and trying to hide that just makes you look deceiving. It doesn't really. So with someone with Tourette's, like everyone's going to know what my deficiency is. Deficiency. Yeah. Shakespeare, just generally.
And so I'm guessing if you ever sat down for a job interview and they ask you that silly question, tell me about your weakness, you really didn't need to answer.
No, you know what? I offer something else, I think, because it's for me, it's impatient. I'm impatient generally. Yeah. And so, not riding on the coattails of what's obvious, I think is going to only earn you more respect. And I think respect is a large part of marketing.
Valuable phrase. My guest today is Kristof Morrow, reminding you that kindness is always convincing.
If you like what you heard, tell your friends. and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.